Hello, I'm Melissa Vance with the Wayne County Area Chamber of Commerce. The Wayne County Area Chamber of Commerce is proud to launch a special series we are calling A Culture of Community. This series is focused on diversity and inclusion in the workforce. Whether a business is large or small, has an existing diversity effort, or is just wading into the waters for the first time, our speakers will help. In our March session, Daryl Gordon of Warrenley Youth and Family Treatment Center will inspire you. In our April session, Dr. Mengie Parker of IU East will show you that we all have implicit biases. This is the why. In our May session, Belden's L. Mark Charles will show you how they built diversity from the ground up. This is the how. We invite you to lean into this important topic with an open mind and determined to learn something new. Most importantly, look for ways you can make small changes in your circles that will create a ripple effect and ultimately show that we are a welcoming community. The second session is led by Dr. Mengie Parker. He dives into how our brains work and how we all have implicit biases based on past experiences. Dr. Parker has led similar sessions with small groups in the area, including our pilot session in 2021. After this, we knew we had to offer it more broadly. We hope you enjoy it as much as we did.
I have to set my handy dandy timer so I don't go over time. People accuse me of being long-winded. It's a baseless accusation. It's a baseless accusation. Good morning. I hope everybody's doing well. My name is Mengie Parker, and we're going to talk a little bit about implicit bias today. In my role at Indiana University East, I'm a professor of criminal justice, but I also serve as the director of institutional effectiveness. And my foray into implicit bias came by way of needing to find a way to measure it. Because anything that's implicit is going to be, by definition, difficult to measure. And so we had to come up with a way to measure whether or not this is happening. And so we developed several mathematical models that we use to test this. And we test all data that comes through our office to make sure that all of our students are getting the same educational outcomes. So what we're going to talk about today is basically what we've learned in our office and how we approach it. And it's going to be probably a little different than what you're accustomed to hearing. That's okay. Okay, don't anybody get nervous about the different approach. We only have about an hour today, and so this is going to be a little bit of a truncated explanation of how we see it and how we do things. But if you have questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand. You're not going to offend me by asking me a question. It's okay. All right? So basically, we're going to talk about implicit bias 1.0. The 2.0 class, I think that was a class, Melissa, that you attended where we talked about data analytics. How do we test this? I would like to apologize for making you sit through that block of instruction because I know it was heavy data and that's not everybody's thing, and that's okay. All right. Sometimes you may see me touch my eye. My allergies are acting up. Just over. I'm not crying. Okay, I'm not crying. They're like, he's so into this. Yeah, not quite, but okay. So as we get started, we want to start with a couple of ground rules that I like to kind of put in place. This is an open discussion. Okay, nobody needs to feel nervous, concerned, worried, upset. It's an open discussion among colleagues. Okay, no judgments. There are no questions that are going to be unwelcome. If you have a question, ask. Okay, that's why we're here, to talk about some of these different things. No experts. You can learn everything there is to know about implicit bias today. 6 months from now, it'll be totally different. And you're back at square one. So don't be impressed with whatever it is you think me or you or whomever else may know about this, because it changes all the time. All right? Some of the things that I don't have time to really get deeply into, but I would encourage you to read some of the literature on implicit bias, read some of the outstanding analyses that are being done on implicit bias. And one of the studies that I always think about when I start talking about implicit bias, there are several meta-analytic studies. A meta-analysis is where we take a bunch of different studies and we put them into a measurement model and we correct for measurement error, and we can see what an effect is for millions of people nationwide across dozens of years. And so one of the studies that I always think about is this medical pain study. There's a study done a few years ago where they surveyed medical students and medical residents, and a large proportion of them actually believed that African Americans had thicker skin than other people, and therefore we didn't feel pain the same way other people did. Never mind the fact that you can look at any textbook, any medical textbook, and it'll tell you there's no difference in skin depth or whatever. You had a statistically significant number of medical students and residents who believed it. There was another meta-analytic study that was done that looked at pain studies across a 20-year span and found that African Americans were 22% less likely to be prescribed pain medicine than any other group. So that is not just a group of medical students who didn't pay attention in class, that's actual practitioners. The reason I always encourage people to read some of the literature on implicit bias and the research is because if there's any little doubt in the back of your head that this is not a real thing, those medical studies, those scientific, rigorously conducted scientific studies, they're going to convince you, okay? And that's always a good thing. Always read the literature. So as we kind of move forward, let's start with a working definition of implicit bias. And this is a standard definition. You may see this any number of hundreds of different places, okay? Implicit bias is bias that results from processing information based on unconscious associations or feelings, especially when the bias is contrary to an individual's conscious beliefs. Yes, you can have an implicit bias that goes contradictory to what you actually believe. And that's because our brains are wonderful things. We're going to talk about your brain in a minute. Our brains are wonderfully complex organisms. So you can actually hold two diametrically opposed beliefs, one of which you don't even know you have it. Okay? We all have biases. Let me start from there. Okay? We all have biases. We are all subject to implicit biases, myself included. But I do meet people who say, well, Dr. Parker, I have absolutely no implicit biases, and I can certify that. Okay, please keep your certification to yourself. We are all implicitly biased in one way or another, or in multiple ways, because we're all human. So the way we approach implicit bias, and the way we're going to talk about it today, is not from a traditional structural down approach. We're going to talk about it from an individual up approach. And I'm going to show you in a second why that's important. But understanding that implicit biases happen to all of us, we all have them, okay, is the first step. So implicit bias doesn't just impact you individually, it impacts you in organizations. Part of my research area, most people know I'm a criminologist, so I study gangs, criminal organizations, but I also study organizational management because gangs are organizations. One of my areas of study is an area called bureaupathology, which is a very small subset of researchers who even look at this. But bureaupathology is basically how individuals within an organization use the power of that organization to hurt people. Okay? Bureaupathology. If you've ever been to the DMV, you've probably experienced bureaupathology. There are 12 lanes here, 2 of them are open, and one of the people are on, coffee break, and you're just trying to get your license renewed, and you got to fill out 12 forms, and then 6 of them are incorrect. You got to start over. That's bureaupathology. It's called institutionalized or institutionalism, where we don't care about actually helping you. We just care that you did the right form, and you're in the right line. That's a form of bureaupathology, using the power of an organization to negatively impact people. So the best way to kind of explain how implicit bias, and I hope I didn't just break the presenter. Okay, you didn't see anything, none of you. The best way to explain this is to give you an example using a story. Imagine you had 2 kids in identical homes with identical parents, and both of these parents had a vase. A priceless Ming vase left to them by their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and they can trace this thing back dozens of years. Parent A tells the little kid, do not play with the ball in the house because I don't want you to break this vase. Go outside if you want to play with the ball. Parent B tells kid B the exact same thing. Both parents walk away. Kid A grabs the ball, and he's bouncing the ball. He's going for self. He's doing his thing. He slams it up against the wall. He tackles it. He rolls around with it. And then he spins around and he sees the vase and he's like, I can hit this. And he throws the ball at the vase, shatters the vase into 1,000 pieces. Kid B is mindful of what the parent said, but he's careless. And so he grabs the ball. And he's like, I'm going to go outside. And he's walking outside and he's not paying attention. He bumps into the wall. He's just walking. His shoe is untied. He trips over his shoe. He falls. The ball rolls out, hits the table, and the vase crashes and shatters into 1,000 pieces. Which situation is worse? The kid who intentionally threw that? We must have some parents in here. Anybody? So who agrees that's the worst situation? Anybody disagree? Because some hands didn't go up. Yes, ma'am. What do you think? You say situation B is worse?
Well, the vases crashed in both situations, so the effect is the same, even though the intent was different.
That's the right answer. It doesn't matter if you're the vase. The problem is that we tend to see ourselves as the parent. Guess what? You're not. Okay? You're not the parent. It doesn't matter whether it was intentional or if it was due to negligence or just not paying attention. The vase is still broken. Okay? So it doesn't matter. The problem is we've been trained, especially those of you who are administrators. How many administrators here? Come on, raise your hand. Don't make me check your backgrounds. Okay, a few people. All right, because I'll check your background. That's me. That's what I do. You will come home. Look, you will come home, I'll be sitting on your couch reading your mail. I am that guy, okay? I am that guy. Don't make me go there, okay? She's like, really? Yeah. All right. If you're an administrator, okay, these things become even more important, all right? So from this particular standpoint, who's the kid? What do you think? Who's the kid? Administrators, raise your hand. Oh, now no one wants to be an administrator. Everybody's like, I'm not putting my hand up. Administrators, you're the kid. I know you thought you were the parent. You're not the parent. You're the kid. What's the ball? The ball is your policy, your procedure, your programs. That's the ball. And it doesn't matter whether you intentionally use your policy, program, and procedure to hurt people or whether you did it because you were careless. That's the ball. And you're the kid. What's the vase? Who's the vase? Everybody else in this room. You're the vase. You get to get shattered or not based on things that have nothing to do with your inherent value. You can be as valuable as you want to be. Everybody can look at you and objectively see your value. Because honestly, the most valuable thing in any organization are the people. But you can still be shattered based on factors that have nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with your effectiveness, efficiency, or your relevance. You can still get shattered. Who's the parent? Anybody?
The organization?
It's okay. You're close. You're close. It's okay. It's okay. It's like I tell my students, it's okay to be wrong in here, okay? You don't want to be wrong at work. Here's where you want to be wrong. The parent is the law. The parent is the law. It's the structure. It's everything around you. And just like the law, your parent tends to tell you not so much what to do, they tell you what not to do, okay? Don't run in the street. Don't chase the ball. Don't do this. So you can pass whatever law you want to pass. It still comes down to the people who are implementing it to determine whether or not you're going to have a more equitable society. Period. So going at this particular problem top down, from structure down, is one approach. But structure down typically means passing laws, changing policy, changing ordinances. If you don't go at it top down and bottom up, you're not going to make the progress that you hope to make. That's why. why are we still having this conversation about implicit bias, discrimination, equity, inclusion? Why are we having this conversation in 2022? Because like one of my favorite professors, Dr. George Wilson, used to say, if you had the solution, you wouldn't still have the problem. The fact that you still have the problem is de facto proof that you don't have the solution, or you don't have a complete solution. Does that make you evil people and we have to all burn you at the stake? No. What it makes you is humans who just need to take a step back and look at the whole problem, not one part of it. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Sometimes I have to check because people are like, that makes absolutely no sense. I'm like, what doesn't make sense? So, the law, that's the parent. Laws can be well-meaning, and sometimes people follow them, but you can still be a careless kid and break vases. Everybody who works for you, everybody who works with you, they're vases. So the top-down approach is to change the laws, change the ordinances, change the rules. The bottom-up approach, change the people who get to be kids. And ultimately, vases are safer when you stop promoting careless kids. Make sense? So, this is how implicit bias can negatively impact people through bureaupathology. Put a careless kid in charge, and you'll break vases. And the vase won't know why. They'll just know they're broken. Okay? So, now we get to the core of how we look at implicit bias from that individual level up. And basically, if I had to sum everything up in one sentence, it would be blame it on the brain. Now, I'll try to not sum anything up with just one sentence, but this is kind of the core of what we've kind of figured out as far as how we test data and look at different things. Blame it on the brain. Okay, the reason I don't come in and I start calling you names and pronouncing you bad people is because you're human. We all have brains. Everybody in this room has implicit biases, myself included. The question is whether or not you take stock of it and you do anything to control it or correct for it. That's the real issue. Okay? So, there's two concepts I want you to become familiar with or become more familiar with. All right? The first one is heuristics. Everybody knows heuristics from your college days or your high school days or whatever. Heuristics is a process of using a decision-making process based on past stimuli to solve a problem in the most efficient way possible. However, using heuristics does not guarantee optimal, correct, or even rational solutions, only sufficient ones for reaching an immediate conclusion. And your brain, just like mine, they're programmed to do this automatically. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. You can hate it, you can be angry with it. Our brains are created and structured to basically find shortcuts. And they're really good at it. Why? Because your brain is busy. I cringe every time I hear somebody say, well, you only use 10% of your brain. That's not true. Okay, that's not true. You use your whole brain. 10% may be for active cognition, but the rest of your brain is busy pumping your blood, making sure your kidneys work, making sure your skin is sensitive to a snake or something that's on you. Your brain is busy. And so it tries to find shortcuts on how to do things so that it doesn't have to spend extra brain power thinking about every little thing. And we always use this example. When you drive home at night, you're probably going to drive home the exact same route that you always drive. Why? Because your brain has found the most effective, efficient way to get you home without you having to think too much about it. That's just what your brain does, and your brain does it better than anything else. That's heuristics. Well, your brain is like a sponge, especially the younger you are, but it never stops being like a sponge. And so every image, message, everything you're told gets stuck in there somewhere in the back of your head for your brain to pull it out and use it at a later time when it needs it. So that crazy Uncle Chuck that we all have, and I can't talk about my Uncle Chuck because he's passed away, but he knows I used to use him as the example. That crazy Uncle Chuck when you were growing up who told you, hey, you want to be careful of this group because they do A, B, and C. Don't go around those people because such and such and such and such will happen. That gets stuck in your head. Even though, as a rational, mature adult, you know that's not the case. Not all of any group does any one thing, still in the back of your head because your brain is like a sponge. It holds on to this stuff, okay? Then something bad happens and your brain immediately goes to heuristics. What's the quickest, most efficient way of making sense of the situation, even if it's not a correct one or one that actually addresses all the facts? There's what your Uncle Chuck told you. Well, then you have to add other stuff, okay? And we'll talk about the other stuff in a second, but heuristics is the first word you want to be real comfortable with because this is why your brain gets programmed, okay? The second word, neuroplasticity. In the last 3-4 years, I've learned a lot about the brain. I've learned a lot about neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to restructure how it learns and behaves, and neuroplasticity even allows your brain to restructure signals within the brain after a TBI, traumatic brain injury, to allow your brain to continue to function even after you've had a traumatic brain injury, okay? So you can actually use neuroplasticity to change how you see people. It's done all the time, okay? And so how these two things work together, the first thing on the screen, is basically the core of how your brain builds implicit biases. But neuroplasticity proves that you don't have to stay a slave to those biases. You don't have to continue to see these things as way. Whoever and whatever you are today is not who you have to be tomorrow, because you get a say in what your brain does. But if you don't control your brain will control you. That's the truest thing I can tell you, because somebody's going to be in control. So when we look at neuroplasticity, there's a lot of research out there that talks about how you use neuroplasticity to change implicit biases and behavior and those types of things. And I always tell people about one of my favorite books, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. If you really want to read more about what your brain is capable of in a way that's normal, because there's another great book called In the Shallows. That book's a little heavy. Okay, a lot of neuroscience, a lot of stuff. 10 pages into the book, you'll be plotting my death for even recommending it. So if you want to go heavy, cool, read In the Shallows. Otherwise, Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. And so Duhigg has a patient in this book who wants to stop smoking, and she has a problem with smoking cessation programs. They don't work. Nothing has worked for her. She's smoked X number of years, nothing works. So he says, well, okay, I decided to try something new and innovative. He tells her, I want you to go on vacation for 2 weeks, but before you do that, I want you to go home and change all the furniture around in your house. And she's like, that doesn't make any sense. He's, no, look, just trust me on this. Go home, change all the furniture around in your house, then go away to a vacation resort somewhere for 2 weeks. But don't smoke. No cigarettes, no lighter, nothing. So she says, okay, fine. Changes furniture around the house, goes on a 2-week vacation. And what she found is that while away for those 2 weeks, it was easier to not smoke because she was in a place where she couldn't smoke. The resort didn't allow, cigarettes, smoking, nothing like that. So it was easier to stop because she was in a totally new place. But when she came home, she was also in a totally new place. Because the furniture was all different, everything was different. Her physical surrounding was completely different. So it was easier to maintain the habit of not smoking. And there's research that shows your physical surroundings can impact how your brain functions. What's the best type of drug rehab to send somebody to? A day reporting center where they go in and out and come home every day, or one where they have to stay on site? Stay on site. Why? Because they're in a completely different place, surrounded by completely different things and people and everything else. It's easier to jumpstart the new habit in a different place. So your brain, I have an immense amount of respect for what I've learned about our brains and what we are capable of doing. So trust me when I tell you, whoever you think you are today, you don't have to be that person tomorrow. You get to choose. Okay? And now that I've told you and it's been recorded, no one can ever say they didn't know. So I will be using this tape against all of you later if you say, I never do that. Yes, you did. All right. So now that we understand kind of how this works in your brain, how does it get in your brain? Okay? How does that happen? This is how bias formation starts. And everybody calm down. We are not going to discuss the structural equation model on the screen, okay? As much as I would like to, we're not going to talk about that, all right? Because whenever I show the slide, people tense up like, I didn't come here to do math. Yes, you did, all right? This is just from one of the random number of articles I've read, looking at different implicit bias research projects and things that are out there. There is an immense number of people who are doing research on implicit bias, and they're doing mathematically rigorous analysis on this. This is real science, okay? It doesn't become more real than the work that's being done on how we form implicit biases. So these things are real, and they're being measured, and we are slowly figuring out ways to move away from implicit biases, to create a more equitable society by creating more equitable people. Okay? So when we talk about bias formation, you want to understand the biases that you receive from your Uncle Chuck or from your granddad or your grandmom or great Aunt Bessie. I hope nobody has a great Aunt Bessie. All of these biases that you receive from these people, that's just the starting block. That's just the stepping stone. That's just the first step. Now, I had somebody once say, well, Dr. Parker, are you saying I have to just hate my grandfather? No, I'm not saying you have to hate your grandfather. What I'm saying is realize that everybody was born and raised in a different time, okay? And you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because my Uncle Chuck, just because my Uncle Chuck said some really crazy things, I take that for what it is. That doesn't mean I love him any less. It means I cognitively pay attention to the fact that he was born in a different time, in a different place, and he had some horrible experiences that I am thankful that I don't have to live through. That doesn't mean I don't love him. So don't think that by admitting your implicit biases, that means you hate your grandparent. It doesn't mean that, okay? It doesn't mean that. So in addition to what biases we receive from family members, or from friends, or from whomever else, we have to deal with media sources. Okay? We have to deal with media sources. And in dealing with that, we are inundated by media sources all day, every day. And I like to challenge people sometimes to say, I want you to go home and I want you to go 24 hours without being exposed to any media sources. You can't do it. Okay? The car radio, you can drive down the highway, there's a billboard. It's a media source. You are literally swimming in a matrix of media. And there's really nothing you can do about it. It just seeps in. Remember, your brain is like a sponge. The 24-hour news cycle is one of those things that has really hurt our perceptions of things. If a bad thing happens, you're going to hear about it 6, 7, 8 times before tomorrow. And if it comes with a picture, that same picture is going to be burned into your memory. So next time something happens, there's that heuristic, analysis that's going to come out. But the bigger threat right now is something we like to talk about: shared trauma and lived experiences. If you spend a lot of time on social media, you are basically subjecting your brain to a similar lived experience every time you hear a horrible story from one of your friends in California who had a home invasion, and your friend is telling you how they were tied up and you were so scared they were going to hurt the kids and all this. You experience that same thing as if it happened to you. And that's why you have to be really careful what you bring into your home, because you're bringing these different experiences into your home, and a lot of times your brain will look at it as the same thing. It depends on how emotionally it hits you, okay? If you let a really close friend of the family who's in another state experience something really bad and they tell you about it in graphic detail and how powerless they felt and how vulnerable they felt, that's gonna impact you and it's gonna stay with you. You may not see it overtly, but that's why we call it implicit bias. It's there and it comes out, and we'll talk about how it comes out in a second. So this concept is really problematic. Once an implicit bias seats itself in your head, then we get into, I'm trying to be time conscious. I don't want to go over time because Roxy will beat me up. And so as I get older, I don't heal as quickly. I don't want the trouble. So once you have these implicit biases that kind of creep in, Then we start looking for confirmational bias. And that's basically looking for things that support what we already believe. That's how implicit biases get locked into place. Okay? They seep in through this constant inundation, whether it's direct from parents or family members or whatever, or through media. They get locked into place when you start looking for data or evidence that supports what you already believe, even if what you already believe wasn't true. That's how it gets locked in. Okay? So I like to call, confirmational bias. I typically call that Thanksgiving dinner because it's Thanksgiving dinner. My Uncle Chuck is usually there. So this is kind of that process for how these different biases happen. And it's happening all day, every day. Okay? Because of the matrix in which we live. All right? So what does it look like? And we're going to talk about some different implicit attitude tests. Sometimes you'll see the term implicit attitude versus implicit bias. An implicit attitude is something that happens in your head when you make an incorrect or spurious correlation between a couple things. The implicit bias is when you take a step to do something that harms somebody, to break a vase. Okay? That's what basically the difference is. So a great example of this is the difference between looking at somebody and seeing somebody. When you look at person A, this kind of looks like, doesn't this look like the street downtown Richmond right there by the power company, and you walk under that little underpass? I always think it looks like that, okay? Maybe it's just me. This is what happens when you're walking down the street in Richmond and you look at this guy right here, but you see this guy right here. So you whip out your phone and you dial 911 and you call the police and have them come check out a suspicious person. But what's actually suspicious about person A? Nothing. Joker's hanging out, enjoying the day. Sunshine is a nice day out. What's suspicious about person A? Nothing. But at the point you dial 911 and you have the Richmond PD show up and stop person A, you've actually violated person A's Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure. That's a seizure of his person when he has done nothing wrong but stand here. You broke a vase. Okay? Because you were careless. You broke a vase. What did person A do? Nothing. Now, person B is a member of a gang. He's got gang tattoos all over his face, and he's got some other gang indicators that indicate he's killed people right there on his face. But person A is not person B. You looked at person A, but you saw person B. And so you whipped your phone out and you decided to break a vase. You may think, well, there's no harm in me being careful. No, it isn't. There's absolutely no harm in any of you being careful. But were you being careful? What's the indicator that person A is somebody of which you needed to be careful? Just because he's here? If that's the case, I should wear my vest because you're all here, we're all here. That can't be the indicator. This is where you have to come face to face with the mirror and admit what you really believe. And that's uncomfortable, but it has to be done if we are all gonna stop being careless children, careless kids. I use the word kids. So, what happens when you're at the park, you're hanging out, and this guy's there playing, he should be trying out for an NFL team, but this guy's there and he's playing some ball with the friends or whatever, and you look at this guy, but you see this guy. So you whip your phone out and you dial 911 and you call Richmond PD because you are sure he is up to no good. Not person B, because person B doesn't exist. Person A. Richmond PD, there's a guy out here and he's got a gun and what does the gun look like? I don't know, it's brown, it's kind of spherical, but it's kind of elongated. It's the worst gun I've ever seen. What? Brown and spherical and oblong? You mean like a football? No, it's not a football. I swear it's a gun. It's a 27 millimeter automatic weapon. Really? He's got that in the park? You need to get out here right now. And the Richmond PD shows up and they approach guy A with no reasonable suspicion or probable cause, not saying that Richmond PD would do this, but they approach this person thinking he has a gun. And they just don't see it. And they confront him, hey, get your hands up right now. what is he going to do? For what? I got a football. I mean, we're down 7 points. I'm trying to get back in the game. If he resists, how is that going to end? You see how this works? This is why we go bottom up, not top down. Okay?
So I have
Yes.
a question.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously on B, they have a gun, so.
Yeah.
B. But on the previous slide where you had the two people, we talk about A, make those decisions and biases. But wouldn't B also be an implicit bias if we made that decision based on what they look like? I understand.
Yeah. If person B is not doing anything wrong, yeah. Because you can be, and this is a question I always ask my students, is it illegal to be in a gang? No. Because people have First Amendment protection, freedom of association. You can be a member of a gang. It is only illegal to commit gang-related crimes. But when we see person B, the assumption is what? They're about to commit a crime because they have a history of committing crime that's literally tattooed all over their face. But you're right. Even to look at person B, is this person doing something illegal? We never get to that point because we don't see person B because there's not that many person Bs. If that makes sense. What we do is we see person A and we just assume it's person B who's about to do something. So you see how many jumps we make? And we do this. There's hundreds of stories a day of people who do this. Okay, so that's a good observation. All right. What's going on here? You walk through town and you look at person A and people begin to immediately avoid her. Let's go this way. Let's go this way. We are not walking down this. Why? Why are we not walking? Look, just trust me. Let's walk over here. We don't. Okay, but why? What's the problem? Because you looked at person A, but you saw person B. What's person B's name? Really? I mean, really? An entire room full of people. Really? Really? The whole room. Is there anyone here who didn't know person B's name? Honestly, is there one person? All right, two people. All right. See, because this is an implicit bias. This is the newest implicit bias. And all over the country, people are avoiding middle-aged white females, especially if they have a certain haircut. Has anybody heard of the quote-unquote Karen haircut? You guys have heard? That's a thing. Where does that go to the extreme? Recently, there was a young lady who was raped on a train in Philadelphia. I'm sorry, in Pennsylvania, not Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and people stood by and watched and refused to help.
Oh, that's horrible. But they recorded it, right?
But they recorded on their phones, which is how the police knew who to arrest, because people actually recorded and shared the recording with the police. Had no problem. Yeah, here you go. And when the officers asked them, why didn't you stop this? Hey, not my issue. I mean, she could have, hey, I don't have anything to do with it. And this is happening where we see case studies of people assaulting women in different places and nobody will do anything. Okay? So implicit biases apply to everyone. Everybody's got an implicit bias. And so now it becomes a vicious cycle. Okay? And this is why it's got to be stopped from both top down and bottom up. You can't just do one and think it's going to matter as much. Here's one that happens quite a bit. Your organization is looking for a new director. You need somebody who can, increase revenue, increase social relevance, which is a big thing. One of the ways we evaluate programs has to be effective, has to be efficient, and it has to be socially relevant. And so you have applicant A apply. And applicant A has a huge resume, or CV that shows that she's effective, she's efficient, she does outstanding work, she grows organizations everywhere she goes, she just has impeccable credentials, but the hiring committee decides not to hire her. Because they look at person A, but they see person B. And that's the old trope of the angry black woman. Okay, well, we don't want to hire her just in case she happens to get angry one day, 7 years from now. We don't want to take a chance. So what happens is a competent, competitive, effective, efficient administrator doesn't get a chance to do the job, not because of anything curricular, but because of something co-curricular. That's the careless kid who broke a vase. It doesn't matter that we didn't say that we didn't want to hire her because she was African American. We didn't want to hire her. It doesn't matter. A capable, competent, effective, efficient candidate doesn't get to do the job because of something that has nothing to do with the job. That's an implicit bias. We don't look at it like that. Okay? Because we like to put implicit bias in this itty bitty little box and leave it there. Okay? So my next question is, what if you hired person A and 7 years from now, she did get angry about something? So what? Why does person A have to be superhuman to do the same job as the rest of us? You see my point? Part of implicit bias is having reasonable expectations and allowing everybody else to be human. Anybody here who's never made a mistake, raise your hand. Please don't raise your hand. Please don't raise your hand. There's like 70 people who are like, let's slip that in there. So raise your hand. Like, I saw all of you. You're like, let me just slip that in there. No. Yeah. I should start turning my back when I say, don't do that. Don't do that. Why are certain groups of people required to be superhuman to just do what everybody else does? That's an implicit bias in and of itself. Okay? That's an implicit bias in and of itself. This is one that people either love or hate. You're at the park having a picnic with your family, and people A show up. And they're just checking to make sure everybody is safe. They have patrol rounds they have to make like anybody else. You look at people A, but you see person B. This used to happen all the time. I was a law enforcement officer for 7 years. And the thing that got me most, my shock, the thing that shocked me most when I became a law enforcement officer is how many people used to spit when they would look at me. And I never understood this. And it's like, I was like, the newbie or whatever. And my field training officers, I'm like, people spit a lot in Durham. And he was like, oh my God, really? I was like, what? I don't know. Every time I see somebody spit. He said, no, you notice they make eye contact with you and then they spit. That's their way of spitting on you in effigy. And it is. That's what people do on the street in the real world when they don't like you. They look at you, they make direct eye contact, and then they spit. Because there's nothing you can charge them for doing that. That's very common. That's literally an everyday thing. I didn't know that because I was a rookie. My field training officer, bless him, he tolerated a lot from me. He was like, oh my God, that's not what that is. I was like, I didn't know. What? Right. But we have people who direct implicit biases against us, and we also direct them toward other people. You see why we're in the situation we're in? Because it is a vicious cycle. Okay? Everything that people do to us, we turn around and we do it to somebody else. Well, somebody has to stop. Okay? And it's not going to stop by passing another law, because that's the parent giving instructions about not breaking the vase. What we need are fewer careless kids. And that's what we're doing today. We're converting you into non-careless kids, careful kids, all right? So what do we do? What's our next step, okay? And my alarm is gonna go off when I get close to time, so I'm trying to leave time for you guys to ask questions, okay? So what do we do about this? How do we do this? Well, the first thing is you wanna find out who you are. Everybody's like, I know who I am. No, you know your representative, okay? You don't know who you are. You know your representative, all right? We gotta find out who we are, and there's nothing wrong with that. One of the things I always recommend to people is take some implicit attitudes tests, okay? But everybody look at me, gotta be careful. Do not just go online and start typing in implicit bias test, because there are hundreds of crazy tests out there that will give you the wrong answer. And they will pronounce you, this or that, and they'll call you names, and they'll say, but for $99.95, you could take our better person training and you'll be a better person. Don't do that, okay? There are several really good implicit bias tests. Most of them now, I found out, are using the Harvard test. The American Bar Association and the Public Broadcasting System, they're not using their individual tests anymore. They're using the Harvard test. So use the Harvard test. There's a link here. I'll make sure Roxy has a copy of the link for anybody who wants to do this. And what the Harvard implicit attitude tests are, because there's multiple tests, it's basically a series of questions that have been tested for validity and reliability that basically tell you whether you are more or less biased in one direction or another. They don't call you names. They don't say bad things about you. They just tell you more or less biased in one way or another. And what these different tests do is they actually will test for different things. Bias against weapons or people who own weapons, bias against gender, bias against age, bias against weight, all those different types of things. And so what it does is it acts as a barometer to give you an idea of where you are right now. But remember neuroplasticity. Wherever you are now, whoever you are today, that does not mean you have to be that person tomorrow. But how do you become a different person tomorrow if you don't know where you are today? You can't. And so what the Harvard tests do is they help you get an accurate idea of where you are right now. And these implicit attitudes, they may not apply to you, but they may. And so this is a way to be sure about where you're starting from and where you want to be tomorrow. Okay, I'll tell you about the controversy, which I don't see this as a big controversy, but there's a group of researchers, about 7 of them, who if you go online and you look at the Harvard test, they're going to tell you the Harvard implicit attitude test is the worst thing ever. It should be banned and everyone involved should be deported to Paraguay. You're like, why? What is so wrong with this test? Basically, validity tests are fine. The internal reliability test is typically done by a test called Cronbach's alpha. And the threshold for an internally reliable test is 0.700. Theirs was 0.600. So because of that, there's a group of 7 researchers who say you should not use the Harvard test, blah, blah, blah. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, I've taken several of their tests. The questions are methodologically correct. The validity and reliability metrics are rigorous. There's no problem with it. It's the best test that I've seen out there. Like I said, these other organizations are now linking directly to the Harvard test. Nobody's doing their own test or whatever from what I'm seeing. There are several university tests that are out there. Fine. I haven't seen any of them that are better than the Harvard test. So I would recommend just use that one. Now, if you want to pay $99.95 to Joe's implicit bias shop, that's fine. You can do that. I would just recommend using the Harvard test, okay? Once you test yourself, and those of you that are administrators, this is not something I recommend requiring anybody to do. This is something you do for yourself. You can make it available to your people as a professional development exercise, but you don't want to require anybody. You don't want to force anybody to do this, okay? Once you take some of these different implicit attitude tests and you kind of get an idea of where you are, then what are some daily strategies you can use to kind of help shut down some of these different implicit biases, or at least bring them under control? Mark Twain once wrote, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts." That became the motto for the old green books that were used for African-American motorists when they travel, because African Americans were not allowed to eat in restaurants or stay in hotels. And so it was a guide. The Green Books were guides for where people could stay safely. And you didn't want to stay anywhere that wasn't, listed in the Green Book because you didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but it was probably not going to be good. So travel, meet people, interact with different people. I had somebody ask me once, well, if there's an African American guy and I see him assaulting somebody or whatever, yeah, that person is doing a bad thing, but they're not doing it because they're African American. Because for every one African American person you see doing something bad, there's 100,000 more that aren't. That's a function of your exposure to other people. If that's the only African American, Latino, Asian, if this is the only white person you've ever met and they do something bad, then you're subject to think all white people are like this, all Asians are like this, all Latino people are like this. But when you have 28 other Latino friends who are not robbing a bank, it's not because the person's Latino. It's because the person's a criminal. Okay? New hobbies. Try some new hobbies. That's our guide. We have about 10 minutes left. You want to do some new hobbies. Do some different things. Try some different stuff. Not everyone likes to try new hobbies. I understand that. I get it. I have no problem with it. Trying new hobbies is a great way to expose yourself to people who are just different. Okay? But if you don't want to do that, do the same things you like doing in a different place. Just do them in a different place. Okay? Post-COVID, of course. I have to always say that post-COVID so I don't get in trouble for whatever. Although I think we're probably as post-COVID as we're going to get. So you could do some new things or do some old hobbies in different places. Whatever your hobby is. If you like golf, I promise you there are plenty of Asian, Latino, black, white, whatever group you want to think of, plenty of male, female golfers. There's plenty of any type of person who would love to sit down and talk with you about golf. Okay? I like shooting sports, and I can tell you when I go to the range, I have every type of person here, and nobody cares what I look like. They want to know, hey, what are you shooting? Is that a Sig Sauer? Oh, wow, that's cool. Mind if I get some shots with that? Yes, I do. Go away. But they are not focused. They are not focused on the color of my skin. They're not focused on my gender. They're focused on whatever the hobby is. And that hobby is the thing that links us, right? That hobby is something that really matters as opposed to something that doesn't matter. So do that. Take a class. This is one I like to make this recommendation because over the summer, I like to take continuing ed classes. I actually live in Dayton. And so Sinclair Community College has really great classes where you can take a continuing ed class. It's like a short 8-week class, and it's just continuing ed. You don't have to be admitted as a formal student or whatever, but I get to meet different people. I get to sit in a class and meet different people and learn different things with new people. That's a great thing to do. It's not a lifelong commitment. You're not trying to get a master's degree in whatever it is. You just take a class, okay? And I'm sure there's probably community colleges around here that have similar types of things. Take a class. Also, if you don't want to do that, start a lunch club, okay? And then invite me, because I'm pro-food, all right? I am pro-food. So if you don't want to do that, start a lunch club where you say, once a month, I'm going to put together a group of people from different offices or different places around Richmond and Wayne County, and we're going to have lunch together. And so the first week of the month, you send out some invitations to 5 or 10 people, or keep it small, 5 or 6 people, and say, hey, part of a lunch club, we're going to have lunch at such and such location. Would you guys like to come? Who is going to turn down lunch? Okay? And so having a lunch club just once a month, it doesn't have to be something you spend a lot of money on or a lot of time putting together. Set up a lunch club and just have lunch with different groups of people, and you can do it any number of ways. I recommended this to another group. If you work for a city office or county office, pick a different office every month to invite to lunch. And just say, it's a brown bag, everybody bring your lunch, let's just get together and we're just gonna have lunch together. Well, what's the purpose? Because people may be a little suspicious. What's the purpose? The purpose is to get together and make random chewing noises. That's it, okay? We're having lunch, that's all it is. It doesn't have to be some grandiose event, because meeting other people is as grand an event as you're probably gonna ever do in your life. Okay, that is worthy in and of itself. So lunch club is a great thing to do. All right, I know I kind of went a little quick. People accuse me of talking fast. You know, it's not true. It's not true. But at this point, if you have any questions, I'll answer questions to the best of my ability, and then I'll turn it back over to Roxy because she's already looking at me with a rough look, like. Question? Yes, ma'am. Question.
Dr. I have two. One
Okay.
is I listened to an NPR show on the way over here about Elon Musk buying Twitter, and so a lot of the time you were talking about this, I'm interested in your thoughts about that. But my second one, I think it's important that we all are hearing this because we are influencers of children. I also think it's important to get this kind of a message into the schools, and I don't know if there are any efforts. I don't know if it's embedded in any curriculum. My kids have been gone so long, I don't know anymore, but I think, do you know about any efforts in K through 12 to address and just talk about biases and?
That's a great question, and I don't. Admittedly, I don't know about efforts to bring this into the school system. I know there are multiple law enforcement agencies around the area that we've done training through Corey George, his work at probation. We've done training for all of his probation officers. We've done training for the sheriff's department. We've opened this training up for, like I said, multiple law enforcement agencies, and we had really great turnout for that. We've done quite a bit of implicit bias training, and we have different sessions. The 1.0 session, which this is a brief version of the 1.0 session. Then we have the 2.0 implicit bias, which is organizational testing. How do you actually test your data to find out if this is happening or not? And then the 3.0 is specifically for law enforcement officers because there are some extra things that go into this that they need to kind of be aware of. We had a phenomenal turnout with that. I mean, we had officers from all over the region who came to that. We have not done this for the school system, but that doesn't mean that they don't have it embedded in their programming right now. They may have it, and I'm just not aware of it. The situation with Elon Musk and Twitter, I have no idea. I really have no idea. My thing with social media, I am actually not on social media at all. I have a LinkedIn page that I never go to, and every now and then I'll get a really angry email. Why didn't you come to the such and such event? I have no idea what you're talking about. Well, we sent this to you 2 months ago on LinkedIn. That's why I didn't come to the such and such event. So I don't know. I think it could be. It's going to be interesting one way or another, and we'll really just kind of have to see because, I mean, he could push that in a more positive direction or he could push it in a more negative direction. But social media as a whole, it can be dangerous. It's like a loaded gun. And, it could be useful to stay in touch with people, communicate with colleagues, but it could also be very damaging because other people can basically communicate with your kids, your family members. You're bringing other people directly into your house. And so I think it could go either way. Yeah. Yes.
Actually, I can speak to your second question a little bit. In the last 12 months, I'll say that, there was an all-day workshop of people from the Wayne County region, and it included people from the school systems, community partners, the Chamber of Commerce, lots and lots of people. And the focus of that session was really being trauma-informed. And there were definitely discussions of bias that happened over the course of that session. So it's not something, I don't think, that's being ignored, particularly by those that work in the K through 12 space. I don't know if they've had specific training along those lines, but I know it's definitely being discussed.
Okay, any other questions before I turn it over to, yes?
Do you have any recommendations if we wanted to bring implicit bias training to an organization? Whether it should be required or we can just allow volunteers?
Well, as far as training in the organization, most organizations, and I'll tell anybody this, you should have a training regimen, an in-service training regimen. Because things change and your employees are gonna need to know about new upcoming events, things like that. Implicit bias would just be one of those training sessions as part of the professional development of your organization. Those things, yeah, that's a required thing. But when we talk about the implicit attitude tests, those things are optional. But as far as implicit bias as a training platform, That's going to really depend on whether or not your organization has decided that diversity, equity, and inclusion matters. And I say that, and sometimes people will get a little antsy with me, but my thing is this. What you devote resources to will tell me what matters. I don't need you to tell me anything about your mission statement. All I need you to do is show me your budget. Because what's in your budget is what matters to your organization, because we don't spend money on things that don't matter. You will never see me taking up a collection for the Easter Bunny's birthday party, because there is no Easter Bunny. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I think as far as having implicit bias training as part of an organization's professional development training, I think that's very important. Because when you start changing policy and procedure, when you start changing the ball, changing policy and procedure so that it affects people in a more equitable way, people are going to want to know why we're doing this. And if they don't understand the core concepts of implicit bias, they won't understand, and you will get far more resistance when people don't understand. Transparency is always a good thing. So yeah, I would say you're safe requiring it as part of the organization's professional development training. Yeah. Other questions, comments, random thoughts? Anybody want to start a plot? I don't know. I've ran out of things. Questions, comments, random thoughts? Pretty much any day. If there's food involved, I'll work around it. Okay? Yes, I'll work around it. So, all right. Well, if there are no other questions or comments or random thoughts, I'll turn it back over to Roxy. But thank you or Melissa, I'm sorry. Thank you guys for inviting me to talk with you today. And if there's anything we can do for you, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thank you.